Imagine waking up tomorrow morning, right? You grab your coffee, sit down at your computer, only to find that the absolute most powerful digital tool you use has been permanently shut off.
Oh, that's a total nightmare scenario.
Right, and I'm talking about the core infrastructure your entire business or your research or just your daily workflow totally relies on.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not because, your credit card expired or you forgot to pay your bill. The screen just gives you this access denied error entirely because of the passport you hold.
I mean, it sounds like some dystopian science fiction premise, honestly. But as of right now, it is the absolute reality for, 96% of the global population.
Yeah, which is just wild. We are looking at a truly unprecedented moment in modern tech. The U.S. government just ordered Anthropic, which, by the way, is a $900 billion AI titan, to basically lock everyone on Earth who isn't an American citizen.
Right, from accessing its two most advanced models, Fable 5 and Mythos 5.
Exactly. And this wasn't, some phased rollout with a gentle warning period or whatever.
No, not at all. The global shutdown happened practically overnight. It's just a sudden, total severing of global digital infrastructure.
So to really understand the scale of what just happened, we've pulled together this massive stack of breaking sources for today's deep dive.
Yeah, we've got a lot to get through.
We really do. We're looking at fresh, on-the-ground reporting from Fortune, Al Jazeera, The Guardian, Deutsche Welle, and Cyber News as of today, June 15th, 2026.
Plus, we're cross-referencing all of that with macroeconomic data from a 2025 report by the International Finance Corporation.
Right. So our mission today is to break the mechanics of this down. We're going to unpack the timeline of this legal firewall and examine the devastating ground-level impact on global developers.
Especially looking at the tech ecosystems across Africa.
Yeah, absolutely. And then figure out what this means for the future of global tech.
Okay, let's unpack this. Take me to the mechanics of June 12th. How did the U.S. government actually execute a global shutdown of a private company in, a matter of hours? Well, it started with a directive from the U.S. Department of Commerce, specifically their Bureau of Industry and Security.
Okay.
And for context, this is the agency that's normally in charge of making sure things like, fighter jet components or night vision goggles or nuclear enrichment tech don't cross borders into the wrong hands.
Right, physical stuff.
Exactly. But on June 12th, they issued this sudden directive under the Export Control Reform Act of 2018.
Wait, but the Export Control Reform Act usually applies to hardware, right? Like munitions. How does that legally map onto someone in Nairobi or London typing a prompt into a web page?
So they used a very obscure but honestly incredibly powerful legal mechanism called the deemed export rule.
Deemed export?
Yeah. Historically, this rule meant that if a U.S. aerospace company showed controlled physical, let's say the guidance software for a ballistic missile to a foreign national who was physically standing inside the U.S., that interaction legally counted as an export.
Oh, I see.
The logic is that the knowledge was transferred to a foreign citizen, even if the information never actually crossed a physical border.
Okay, so it's like putting a velvet rope around a public library, right?
Mm-hmm.
But instead of just stopping new people at the door, you're actively tapping people on the shoulder who are already inside, reading, ripping the books from their hands, and kicking them out just because they don't have a U.S. passport.
That is the exact legal philosophy at play here. And now, the Commerce Department has mapped that entire concept directly onto artificial intelligence models accessed over the internet.
Wow.
Yeah. Providing an API key to Fable 5 and Mythos 5 to any foreign national anywhere is now classified as an unlicensed export of a controlled munition.
And for anyone listening who isn't a software engineer, an API key is essentially a digital VIP pass, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's the tether that allows an independent app or website to talk directly to Anthropic servers in San Francisco.
And that tether was just severed instantly.
Yeah.
The reporting from Fortune really highlights how rapidly Anthropic complied with this.
Right, they didn't really fight it.
No, by June 13th, literally the very next day, they disabled every single API key and playground environment for all non-US users. There were no protracted court fights, no injunctions. Anthropic just threw the kill switch.
Which is crazy when you think about the sheer scale of the entity we're talking about. I mean, Anthropic currently has a $900 billion valuation.
It's massive.
To put that footprint in perspective, that is roughly the combined GDP of Kenya, Ethiopia, and Ghana. Just boom, shut off.
And the law makes absolutely zero distinction about who is on the other end of that API key.
Really? No exemptions at all?
None. The Commerce Department's interpretation treats a foreign military researcher running simulations exactly the same as it treats, a Google engineer working in Silicon Valley on an H-1B visa.
Or like a foreign student taking machine learning classes at Stanford.
Exactly. It doesn't matter if you are sitting in a dorm room in California. If you don't hold a U.S. passport, you are legally treated like a foreign adversary.
That is intense.
What's fascinating here is the sheer speed of this regulatory action. Like, if you look at historical precedents like the COCOM regime during the Cold War.
Right, where the U.S. restricted computing tech from the Soviet bloc.
Yeah, that embargo took years of diplomatic summits to coordinate. Even the recent U.S.-China semiconductor chip war, which targeted physical hardware supply chains, that took months of gradual implementation.
And this took days.
3 days. For the first time in modern history, we are seeing the regulatory cycle actively outpace the technology cycle.
Okay, I mean, I understand using an embargo to keep advanced tech away from foreign adversaries. That's a known geopolitical strategy. But this is a blanket ban affecting everyone.
Right.
It hits America's closest allies just as hard as its rivals. I'm trying to understand the evolution of the policy here. Classifying a language model as the equivalent of a nuclear weapon feels like a massive leap.
To understand the logic, you really have to look at the continuous mechanical evolution of U.S. export policy over the last few years. And we should maintain strict neutrality about the administrations themselves here, because the underlying threat perception has remained remarkably consistent across the board.
Okay, so it's a shared conclusion.
Exactly. Policymakers simply arrived at the conclusion that AI models approaching GPT-5 levels of reasoning are no longer just really smart chatbots.
Right.
They are foundational infrastructure. They are capable of accelerating cyber warfare, biological weapons development, and strategic military logistics.
So the policy just evolved mechanically to match that escalating threat perception.
Yes. So under the Biden administration, export controls were initially expanded to cover AI model weights and compute access, but they were highly targeted.
A scalpel approach.
Right, restricting specific foreign entities and specific countries, primarily to manage the U.S.-China AI arms race. But then the Trump administration analyzed that exact same framework and concluded that a targeted approach was just inherently porous.
The logic being that in a zero-sum arms race for artificial general intelligence, any leak anywhere in the world is a critical vulnerability.
Correct. So the policy evolved from a targeted restriction into a total blanket ban on all non-Americans.
Just closing all the doors.
Basically, the geopolitical rationale is that the global digital ecosystem is too interconnected. If you allow access in allied nations or to foreign nationals inside the U.S., shell companies and VPNs will inevitably route that access back to adversaries.
So closing every conceivable loophole was viewed as the only way to ensure the tech doesn't indirectly arm a rival.
Precisely.
I mean, I follow the logic of closing loopholes, sure. But looking at the reporting from Cyber News and Deutsche Welle, the fallout from alienating your closest allies seems incredibly dangerous.
It is causing a massive uproar.
Right. The UK, Germany, Japan, South Korea, these are vital partners, and their tech sectors were just locked out overnight. EU officials are going on the record calling this a declaration of digital war against allies.
And an existential threat, yeah.
Japan's Ministry of Economy, Trade, and Industry is currently conducting an emergency review. Aren't you just heavily incentivizing the rest of the world to build a unified competitor to American tech?
You absolutely are. And it validates a massive debate that's been raging in Europe for years regarding digital sovereignty.
Oh, right. The EU AI Act.
Yeah. The EU has been aggressively pushing for tech independence, drafting the AI Act, warning member states about the strategic danger of relying entirely on American tech giants.
And critics always call them paranoid for that.
Exactly. But the U.S. just proved the EU's worst fears correct in spectacular fashion. This blanket ban inadvertently handed European regulators the ultimate, undeniable justification for their digital independence initiatives.
They don't have to debate hypotheticals anymore. The shutoff actually happened.
Right.
But, while European policymakers have the billions of euros to pivot and build their own alternatives, the immediate devastation is hitting the regions that were explicitly told by the West to rely on this infrastructure.
Yeah, the developing world.
Exactly. If we look at the tech ecosystems in Africa, the ground-level impact is just staggering.
The devastation there is a direct result of how the African AI ecosystem was deliberately structured. Startups in hubs like Nairobi, Lagos, Accra, Cape Town, Kigali, They don't have the hundreds of millions of dollars in compute power to train foundation models from scratch.
Right, they aren't building the underlying engine, they're building specialized cars on top of it.
Exactly. So to do that, they rely heavily on mechanisms like RAG retrieval augmented generation.
Right, and for anyone unfamiliar, instead of spending $1 billion to build a massive AI brain from scratch, African developers use an API to connect to an existing brain, like Fable 5. And they essentially handed a local textbook, telling the AI to read and reason purely from that specific data.
And that technique allowed small teams to build incredibly powerful, domain-specific apps for agriculture, microfinance, healthcare.
Which actually brings us to a specific anecdote in the Al Jazeera reporting that really illustrates the human cost here.
And Clinic app.
Yeah. A development team in Kenya had built this AI-powered diagnostic assistant for understaffed rural clinics. It used Fable 5's reasoning engine to analyze local patient health records and suggest triage protocols.
It was actively saving lives.
It was. And then overnight, the app just went dead. The developer's API key was still perfectly valid, their billing account was fully funded.
But the server just rejected it.
Exactly. A doctor typed a patient's symptoms into a tablet in rural Kenya, and the ping was intercepted by this new legal compliance layer.
The app still had all the medical records, but it lost the brain required to read them, and there was no grace period.
No humanitarian exemption at all.
None. Just a blank screen in a clinic that desperately needed answers.
And the academic sector is facing the exact same paralysis. The sources highlight the African Masters of Machine Intelligence program.
Yeah, AMMI. It's a massive initiative that trains top-tier researchers across the continent.
Their entire curriculum was deeply integrated with Anthropic models. You have brilliant students whose thesis projects on AI safety were slated for major global conferences like NeuraPS, ICML, and ICLR.
And all of those experimental platforms were just yanked away mid-experiment.
It's heartbreaking. And looking at the macro cost of this disruption, that 2025 IFC report we pulled,
yeah, the economic projections.
It projected that AI adoption could add $1.2 trillion to Africa's economy by 2035. This blockade fundamentally alters that entire premise.
It wipes it out.
Here's where it gets really interesting. It's like an entire city building its transit system around a highly specific, proprietary type of high-speed train.
Okay, I like this analogy.
They build the tracks, the stations, the ticketing systems, and then one morning the foreign manufacturer of the train presses a button, and every engine permanently stalls. The tracks are there, the passengers are waiting, but the system is dead.
Because the core propulsion was rented?
Exactly.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it reveals a deeply tragic irony about modern international development. For the last decade, organizations like the World Bank and USA have actively encouraged this exact lean development model.
They told them not to reinvent the wheel.
Right. The advice was always, stay agile, use small engineering teams, and leverage global cloud infrastructure.
And the developers did exactly that. They built highly efficient systems entirely reliant on American foundation models.
They did, and that entire developmental paradigm collapsed in a single day. It proved that leveraging global infrastructure was actually just a polite euphemism for building a fatal structural dependency.
Man, that's heavy. And what makes this so volatile isn't just that the U.S. government took the tech away. It's the structural reality that the rest of the world actually helped build these specific models in the first place.
Yeah, this is a huge point of contention.
The sources note a profound shift in the language being used here. Western media is very reluctant to use the word, but tech coalitions across the global South are loudly calling this a modern form of colonialism.
It's a historically heavy word, definitely, but the resentment stems from the mechanical process of how Fable 5 and Mythos 5 were actually created.
They weren't just trained on American websites.
Not at all. U.S. companies built their power through a massive, indiscriminate ingestion of global data. That includes scraping African languages, regional cultural knowledge, and the behavioral data of millions of African users.
So when a user in Lagos or Nairobi corrected an AI hallucination on a platform back in like 2024, they were essentially performing unpaid reinforcement learning.
Exactly. They were refining the model's accuracy for the company. African data helped build the foundation. African developers built the secondary ecosystem. And the moment the tech became incredibly powerful and lucrative,
The doors were locked from the inside.
Exactly. And we're already seeing the backlash organize. A prominent tech coalition in Kenya is flat out calling this digital apartheid.
Wow.
Yeah. Meanwhile, a Nigerian civil society group is drafting a challenge to the World Trade Organization, arguing this violates basic principles of non-discrimination in digital trade.
Okay, hold on. I have to play devil's advocate and push back here for a second, because comparing this to colonialism or apartheid feels like an immense escalation.
Sure, it's strong language.
We're talking about digital terms of service that users willingly agreed to when they signed up. No one forced global users to build businesses on an American company's API. Is it fair to call it colonialism when Anthropic is just a private company forced to comply with a national security directive?
It is a completely valid legal defense, and you are right that Anthropic's hands are tied. They face prosecution if they don't comply.
Right.
But the resentment fueling the WTO challenges isn't about the fine print of a user agreement. It's about a macro historical pattern of economics.
How so?
Well, the classic model of colonial extraction dictates that the metropole extracts raw materials from the colony, processes those materials into valuable finished goods, and then strictly controls the colony's access to those goods.
Oh, I see. And in this context, the raw material is data.
Exactly. It was extracted globally, processed in data centers in San Francisco, and now the colony is completely cut off from the finished computational product. It is that extraction without reciprocal benefit that fuels the anger.
That makes a lot of sense.
The WTO challenges might not legally succeed against a sovereign U.S. national security defense, but the political damage to America's global standing is profound.
Okay, so the bridge is thoroughly burned. If you're a developer in Nairobi or London or Tokyo and the American proprietary APIs are completely off limits, where do you actually go to keep your business alive?
You migrate to the open source ecosystem, and honestly, this is the massive unintended silver lining in all of this geopolitical chaos.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The Commerce Department order specifically targets Anthropic's proprietary models, which are closed systems locked behind API keys. But open-weight models, like Meta's Llama series or the models built by Francis Mistral, are entirely different beasts.
Right, and just to clarify the mechanics for you listening, an open-weight model means the company actually releases the underlying code and the mathematical weights of the AI's brain. So instead of renting access to an American server over the internet, a developer in Cape Town can just download the entire brain onto their own physical hardware and run it locally.
Precisely. The U.S. government effectively just handed a massive world-altering market incentive to the global open source community. Every developer on the planet who was on the fence about closed versus open models just had the decision made for them.
But I was looking at the data on South Africa's Lengau supercomputing cluster in our sources, and it seems like just having permission to download an open-weight model isn't nearly enough to fix this, right?
It's definitely not a magic bullet.
Yeah, downloading a massive AI brain is one thing. Actually running it, powering it, and fine-tuning it requires immense resources. What are they actually missing to achieve true digital sovereignty?
True sovereignty requires 4 highly complex pillars, and the friction in acquiring them is immense. First, you need domestic compute infrastructure.
Which Africa is short on.
Incredibly thin right now. You have South Africa's Lengau cluster and Morocco's Toubkal, but these systems were largely built using standard CPUs for things like weather prediction.
And modern AI requires GPUs.
Massive arrays of specialized graphics processing units. Buying thousands of GPUs from companies like NVIDIA is incredibly expensive, and they're backordered for years.
So they're bottlenecked by the physical hardware supply chain. What's the second pillar?
The second pillar is local labs driving open-weight model development. Organizations like InstaDeep or the African Institute for Mathematical Sciences absolutely have the engineering talent.
But they need the capital to retain that talent.
Exactly. The third pillar is data sovereignty frameworks. This is a legal mechanism that dictates how data flows. If a Western company wants to use African data, this framework forces them to compute and process that data physically inside Africa.
Stopping that free extraction we talked about earlier. That's right.
And the fourth pillar.
Continental coordination. None of this works if every country tries to build its own tiny ecosystem. It requires the African Union to step in and coordinate funding, compute sharing, and legal frameworks as a unified geopolitical bloc.
So what does this all mean? If we look at the optimistic scenario here, isn't this sudden firewall essentially the ultimate tough love forcing function?
It could be.
It's terrifying in the short term, but like a landlord evicting you, it finally forces the global tech community to pull their resources together and build their own native infrastructure from the silicon up.
This raises an important question, though. Do governments actually have the sustained political will to act on that forcing function?
That's the billion-dollar question.
The technical capability and the brilliant minds are already there on the continent. But building sovereign infrastructure requires unprecedented political coordination. If the optimistic scenario plays out, this crisis permanently shocks the global ecosystem out of its complacency.
They build a digital house that no foreign government can ever evict them from. Right. But looking at the sources, there is a deeply pessimistic scenario too.
Which is?
In the pessimistic scenario, the hardware bottlenecks are simply too great. Startups lose their edge and fold. International VCs pull their funding because the dependency risks are too volatile.
Oh, wow.
And the most heartbreaking consequence is massive brain drain. The absolute best AI researchers, seeing no viable infrastructure at home, are forced to emigrate to the US or Europe. The digital divide becomes an impassable, permanent chasm.
It really is a crossroads that will define the next century of the global tech ecosystem. Which brings the reality of this entire deep dive directly to you listening right now.
Yeah, it affects everyone.
Whether you are prepping for a tech meeting this afternoon, running your own startup, or just trying to stay informed about the hidden architecture of the world around you, the core lesson here is about the illusion of safety and dependency. If a $900 billion tech titan can be forced by a single, obscure government directive to instantly cut off 96% of the globe, how safe is the digital infrastructure you rely on every single day?
It forces every organization to rigorously audit their tech stack and ask who actually holds the keys to our operational survival.
And it leaves us with one final, incredibly provocative thought to mull over. If access to AI is now being treated by the U.S. like a militarized physical border, complete with legal walls, export controls, and passport checks, what happens in 5 years?
Right, when the open source community catches up.
Exactly. What happens when the next massive breakthrough in AI safety or a revolutionary cure for a disease is discovered by a foreign developer utilizing a decentralized open source model?
That's the irony of it all.
Because the U.S. just built this massive legal wall to keep the rest of the world out, will it inadvertently lock itself out of the very global innovation it just forced the rest of the world to create?
When you build a fortress to protect your knowledge, you inevitably trap yourself inside.
Something to think about the next time you log into your daily workflow. Keep questioning your dependencies. And keep looking closely at who truly controls the tools you use to build your world. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.